Georgia O'Keeffe as the main character and sleuth. I thought, that is such an annoyingly good idea. I was so envious of this. So Peter Abraham's called it daring. When did it come to you to have Georgia O'Keeffe be your main character and sleuth?
Unfortunately, is this on?
It's on. Yeah. Hold it close.
Unfortunately, it came to me right when the pandemic broke out. So I couldn't go out there to do the research, although I had been there many times before.
So you talk about could not go there, but Georgia O'Keeffe herself as a presence in the book, as the main character of the book, not only as artist and human being, but as sleuth. When did your brain go, ding, 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 I could make her be a main character in a fictional novel?
It was around that time. Well, no, maybe it was about 6 months before. And I first of all, just to preface this, I'd always been fascinated by her, and I'd written a picture book called Georgia Rises 15 years ago, which was just, a picture book, 1,000 words at the most. And it was just about what she did when she got up in the morning, when she was living out there, and she'd go up on the roof of her adobe house, and she'd take a cup of tea, and she'd just look out. And then later, she would climb in, which was fascinating, her old Model A Ford that had a studio in the back of it, and drive out into the desert. So first I did the children's book, and then right around the pandemic time, I thought, why don't I do her as an amateur sleuth?
But rewind a little bit then before the children's book, because that's so fascinating, because what was it then that attached you, lured you to Georgia O'Keeffe in the very first place?
Well, that's sort of funny. When I graduated from college, which as you can imagine was eons ago, and I went to the University of Michigan. I was from Indiana. And my mother said, let's go to New York and celebrate your graduation, and we'll see Broadway shows, and we'll do this and that. And she said, now there's a fabulous exhibit at the Met on Georgia O'Keeffe. And I said, I never really liked her that much. And my mother, and I'd taken a lot of art history, and my mother was just flabbergasted. And she said, I can remember this so clearly. I think I should demand a rebate on your education. And so we went to the Met, and my personal experiences, for me, I had to see those paintings in person. Those flower paintings, you just fall into them. You just fall down the throat of a calla lily. And I was so moved by it. And so my mom then said, well, we should go over, and I guess it was MoMA that has the famous cloud picture that must be like 20 feet across. It's like a mural. And there were which she got the idea for when she was flying to Japan, I think, and looked out and saw these clouds. So I was haunted by her for years, and that's when I first, not then, but maybe 15, 20 years ago, my husband and I started going out to Santa Fe in the Southwest because we loved hiking and all of that. And I just felt that I was in her world, and it was so great.
I mean, it's interesting because there are people that we're drawn to, as authors that we're drawn to, and you after your mom dragged you to the museum, and you fell in love with the paintings. What was it? The light? Was it the color? Was it the shape? What? Talk a little bit about what touched you.
I think, in a way, yeah, it was the light and the scale. She was so daring to just take these flowers head on. And people don't know this, but lots of times what she do is she painted artificial flowers. She had this whole thing about artificial flowers that she loved. I guess, they would stay still and they wouldn't wilt.
Nature's so annoying, right?
Nature can be so annoying for a painter. But mostly, I think it was real flowers. But she makes no bones about that.
Well, it doesn't really matter, does it? Because it's what comes out of her paintbrush that carried you away. You
Yeah.
weren't gauging what the subject was.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then how did that change you as a person when you went into the museum one person and came out someone else?
I don't know. That's a very I don't know, elusive question. I just thought. I suppose my first thought. No, I think I dismissed it as I want to be a painter. I didn't really want to be a painter. I knew I could never match that. But I wanted to see the way she did. And I was, and light became such a thing. And I remember when Chris and I went I've been 3 times now to her house in Abiquiu, which is just wonderful. And you want to come back and you want to throw out everything in your house and you want to just tear down your house and have an adobe house. Well, that's not going to work in Boston. And part of the reason is it's the way the light comes into that house. And I don't know where you live, but we have a lot of shade in our neighborhood. And it would be like living in this world of light.
Well, that's exactly what I was getting at, and I think you put that so beautifully, is that you wanted to be able to see the world through the eyes of an artist, and that's what you've done so perfectly in Light on Bone. And it's a murder mystery, you all. It's a historical murder mystery. So let's talk a little bit before we go back to Georgia herself. Just tell us a little bit about the plot of this book so we know what's between the covers.
Well, first of all, you have to know that she went out there for the first time. She'd been out there before at Mabel Dodge Lewin's place in Taos, but that was in 1929. And she really hadn't been back until 1934, which was a very crucial, cataclysmic year in her life. She was selling a painting that was more than any artist, living American artist, had ever sold a painting for. She was also having a nervous breakdown. Her husband, Alfred Stieglitz, was having a very public affair with a wealthy heiress from the Sears Roebuck industry department store. And she was also having another problem where she had been given a commission to do a mural at, she'd won it actually in a competition to do a mural at Radio City Music Hall. And her husband was very aggravated that she accepted this commission because it wasn't that much money after the huge amount she got paid for one painting. But she wanted to do it. And she was very intrigued by Diego Rivera at that time, so she wanted to follow through with trying to do a mural herself. Well, they hadn't prepared the wall right. And before she even finished the mural, it was disintegrating on the wall. So, and she also was having another problem, which is Stieglitz had forced her into having an abortion a few years before, and it was just haunting her. And she wound up being hospitalized in the psychiatric wing of Doctors Hospital in New York for 3 or 4 months. And then she got out, and she just decided she had to go back to the Southwest. And she'd never stayed at the Ghost Ranch before. And she went there, and she kind of started to paint again. And then, unfortunately, she runs into a dead body in the desert.
So wait a minute. All of that was true up to this point.
Yeah, all of that was true, but it gave me a very good springboard.
Exactly.
And she felt that she was healing. I don't want to use the word recovery because that sort of sounds like alcoholism. But she was literally piecing herself back together again. And there was this one view she had from this little casita at the Ghost Ranch of, now I forget, I think it was southeast.
We'll never know.
Southwest. But there was a mountain there. It was a mesa really, and they called it the Pedernal, Pedernal, which means flint. And she was haunted by this. And she said she wanted to paint it until she owned it. And the thing is, there was a myth about it, and the myth was, it was Indian or indigenous myth, and they called the indigenous people there called it changing woman, that the Pedernal. And so that was really what was happening to her.
And this just brings tears to my eyes, doesn't it to you? What a brilliant idea this is and what a brilliant setting this is. But in this book, which you've written it till you own it, there is this murder mystery that she then feels compelled to solve. So just tell us a little bit about that part of the plot, just the story.
Well, she has done her thing where she's been up on the roof in the morning and then gets in her old Model A. And she had it all set up so she could paint outdoors until it got too hot. And then she could move it all into the back of this Model A and paint in the shade, so to speak. And she gets to the place where she wants to paint, and she walks out in the desert, and she sees a dead body. And it's a guy who's in a priest outfit. So, and she's freaked out, she sees this guy, and the vultures have already made kind of a mess of his skull because he was wearing a little skull cap and then a big thing, but it fell off. And so they were tearing at his scalp, these vultures. So she turns around and goes back and to report the murder. And how much more do you want me to tell you?
Well, I mean, I think that this gets her into this decision to go to the police and tell them about this, to report this, is sort of beautifully parallel to her fascination with how it looked, with the light.
Oh, yeah. And that comes out, with the sheriff coming and the whole police crew from Santa Fe, and they're yelling, "Don't disturb the crime scene," and this and that. And she goes back the next day and finds something that they hadn't seen. And the only reason she finds it is because the way there's a glint of light coming off a coin.
You just bring tears to my eyes. It's just great because one of the things about having an amateur sleuth, of having someone who's being a detective-ish sort of person in a mystery, is that why on earth would they do that? I mean, in real life, if you found a body, you would just call the police. And she does call the police, but again, it's the light that draws her back to this place. Another thing that I absolutely love about this book is how her personality comes through so clearly from moment one in every decision she makes, in her artistic assessments, in her assessments of people, in her, she gets yelled at for messing with the crime scene. And instead of being cowed by that, she uses it as a sort of a joke to poke people back about it. And she's sassy, if I can say that, and she stands up for herself. And the characterization of Georgia O'Keeffe is so much fun to read. I mean, talk a little bit about what it was like to inhabit her and be her in what she says and what she does. I mean, she takes down Charles Lindbergh, and she takes down a rattlesnake, Womp, at the beginning with that same determination and passion. Talk a little bit about being Georgia.
Well, all this has a little basis in truth. I found out that she'd always walk out into the desert with her snake stick in case something happened. And if it did, she'd kill the snake, she'd take a knife out of her pocket and cut off the rattles. And she kept them in a bowl in her living room. And I read someplace she played Chinese checkers with them. But and they were beautiful. I saw a picture of these rattles, from the rattle thing. I thought, that's pretty gutsy, you know? But also what appealed to me, and when I was doing the research, I can't even remember, let me put this in. I have a quote. I found this right away, and I totally identified with it. This is on the first page of the book, and it's a quote from her, where she says, "I've been absolutely terrified every moment of my life, and I never let it keep me from doing a single thing that I wanted to do." Well, that just so set her character. So she was just terrific in that. But now I forget the rest of your
Just sort
question.
of being Georgia. So here is this person who comes across on the page in this duality of being absolutely obsessed, absolutely determined, absolutely her own person, but then haunted by the abortion, haunted by her marriage,
Very
haunted
vulnerable.
by her life. Very vulnerable person. So talk a bit about how you managed to create both of those personalities for her.
Well, I did read a lot of her letters to Stiglitz and to her best friends, especially Anita Pulitzer, who really brought her to the attention of Stiglitz. And she was very bold, and she was a feminist before the word was invented. And she just, I don't know, it's one of my favorite scenes in the book is she has a romance with the sheriff in Santa Fe, and it kind of reminds me, who was Nick and Nora Charles?
There's a lot of banter. I mean, they're these two smart people, and it makes sense for this. And we know from moment one there's going to be a romance from the moment that they, prod each other and joke with each other. And it is like Nick and Nora Charles, but the dialogue between the two smart people who each are vulnerable and each have been damaged and each have been harmed and are each still looking for something good in their lives.
Well, yeah, and she had a great wit. And so one of my favorite passages in the book is when she's driven up to Albuquerque, and he'd gone up there too. They didn't know each other, and she's driving back, and he puts on his siren, and he pulls her aside to arrest her for speeding. And she's never heard of such a thing. And in fact, there wasn't such a thing except and I had to research this, Connecticut was the first state that had speeding laws.
I mean, it's so great because there was no speeding.
There was no speeding.
There were no license plates either, you were saying.
No, so she says, well, what are you doing? And you were speeding. And he said, well, you were driving like a woman. So, this set her off. And I don't want to read you the whole thing, but she just goes after him.
Well, you'll laugh out loud at this, and you'll listen. You'll never hear what someone else says to you in the same way. Again, there are certain words that she picks out as, don't say this, you only say it about a woman. Was that fun to write?
Yeah. I was scared I'd overdo it.
No.
But there's a couple of scenes like that, and when she goes in shortly after she discovers the body, and he said something about disturbing the crime scene, and he says, well, what were you doing out there? And she said, oh, just disturbing the crime scene. So there was that.
That's a wonderful theme that comes up. I don't want to run out of time because I have so many more questions for you, but talk a little bit about how you structure. I mean, there are things that happened at this time, in this period of time, that really happened, that we know happened. And people in this book who are real people who we know about. And then there's also the fiction. So how do you architecturally structure, how do you weave your fictional story through this sort of structure of reality?
Well, that was sort of funny. So I always say, I love a book where you can throw in a few Nazis. I mean, really, that just works so well. And so I got this idea, and I was just really not that far into the book, but I thought, well, I might have this sort of Nazi spy ring, which Bill Martin knows about. And although his book is set about 8 years later. But anyhow, and so I kind of made up this thing called the Lutzen ring, where it was these Nazis who'd come into the United States and they were communicating and doing all this stuff. Well, I soon found out that actually there was a ring in the United States. It wasn't discovered. It was started maybe in 1936, couple years after my book. It culminated, or they arrested these guys in 1941. They were called the Duquesne ring or circle, Duchesne. It was the largest arrest of spies in our country ever, FBI. And so I thought, oh my God, I feel vindicated or something.
Or brilliant or something.
Yeah, so that made me just fly with that. And yeah.
And you have a wonderful author's note where you list all of the
Yeah.
people who are not fictional in the book. So if you, in case you need to ground yourself in who people are, you've nicely listed that for us. Was that fun to put together?
Yeah, I liked reading about J. Edgar Hoover and his snooty secretary and all of that. And some things I fudged a little bit, like the first black man in the FBI, which in those days, for a long time, it was just called the BI, the Bureau of Investigation. But there was an early black man who was an agent, and probably a few years later. And I liked writing about FDR, or J. Edgar Hoover's anti-Semitism.
And there's Lindbergh in the
And-
book.
oh, Lindbergh.
And Anne Morrow Lindbergh in the book.
Lindbergh was terrible, and his wife wasn't so great either. And I know this because my husband's mother went to Smith a little bit after Anne Morrow Lindbergh. But Anne Morrow Lindbergh wrote an article for the Smith Alumni Magazine in 1941 or so that absolutely endorsed fascism. And she said, there are times in our country when we need a strong leader and blah, blah, blah. And people were outraged by it. Now, I found references to it. I did my best to call Smith and the librarian there to ask about this, and I got nowhere. But
What do you make of that?
I think they were mortally embarrassed, I guess. Or, people just don't know history that much anymore. Even librarians.
Oh, yeah, here we go. Some librarians are fantastic.
No, but anyhow, yeah.
Well, the history in it is.
Well, wait, just to add something.
Yeah.
We live in Cambridge, and as we went by tonight, I said to my husband, what's the name of those terrible people who do the OxyContin thing? Sacklers. There is still a building at Harvard that says whatever his name is. Sackler Museum. It has the guy's first name on it. And I mean, the Met has taken Sackler off of their walls or whatever, and so has, I think, MoMA or the Whitney.
And I see another book percolating here.
Yeah.
Do you not? I mean, when Kathy gets her mind on something, I can see what's happening. Let's go back to Light on Bone though, because when you were starting to speak this evening and you were talking about going with your mom to the museum and you fell in love with the pictures, I wondered how you translate how the mind of an artist works and what an artist sees into how the mind of a writer works, that the revelations that you have in your imagination and the way that someone might look at someone or think about something, or how did you translate creativity into this book? And did you learn anything about your own writing from it?
No.
A hard question. I think I'm learning every day from my own writing, every day. I thought of something today that if I would go and do another George O'Keeffe book, I would really want to include. She did in the 1929 these very ominous paintings of humongous crosses that were on the churches, particularly the Maratha churches out there, which are those sort of extreme Catholic Indian people, and the shadows of those crosses. And she did one of the shadows and this starry night behind it. And it's so beautiful. When I saw that today, I thought, oh, what I could write about that.
Well, I hope you do.
I hope I do too. That's why I better write another book, if only for that picture.
Cannot wait. Let me just ask you one more thing, and it's along those lines. The desert comes to light so cinematically in this novel. And you couldn't go, but talk a little bit about how you brought that authenticity of the heat and the light and the animals and the scrub and the casitas and the ghost ranch. How did you bring that all together?
Well, Chris and I have done a lot of hiking out there, and there is something about it that is just haunting. And Chris is a photographer, and so he takes a lot of pictures. And I just would look at those things, and I talk in the book, not very much though, and it sort of happened to me too. Georgia had a very odd perceptual, I guess I'd call it an anomaly, and it's called synesthesia, where you could hear music and think of a color, this sort of overlapping of the senses. And I use that somewhat in the book. And I kind of think I understand it. Like she'd be listening, she mentions in a letter to her friend, I think it's Anita Pulitzer, where she was listening to a record, she loved music, of Pablo Casals. And that she talked about, it reminded her of something at dawn that she saw. She said that it has a slow creeping lavender, something like that. And so you see these senses over, and in that way, I'm a painter, except I do it in words.
Oh, I love that. That is perfect.
Yeah,
Absolutely perfect.
But don't ever put me in front of a canvas. No, so just have a mess.
You have your own talent. You have your own talent. But tell us finally, and I have two more questions. The title "Light on Bone," was it all? It's so perfect and so evocative of this. Was that always the title?
Yeah, it was. And usually I don't think of my own titles. Chris does. But this came to me from the get-go.
How so?
Well, I was so absorbed in her paintings and her light. I mean, light was a character in her life. It was like a partner, more faithful than her husband.
Can you tell us? I interviewed Ansel Adams once.
You did?
I did long ago in the 70s, and I said to him, "How many photographs do you take before you get the one that's right?" And he looked at me like I had lost my mind, and he said, "One." He alleged that he waited for the light,
Yeah.
and he knew it. And think how fast you'd have to do that because it's going to shift.
Yeah.
What do you think? How do you think she thought about light?
Well, I think she thought it.
Every part of this book has light in it.
Yeah, it reveals and it obscures, both not simultaneously, but she wanted to see how it looked in the dark. And when I saw those crucifixes today in one of her paintings, that where they cast the shadow. I mean, they're monumental. They're like these big, black, eerie things. And then they had stars behind them. And I thought, she's looking into this sort of heart of darkness where, about religion and all that. And she's kind of looking behind it and seeing this glittering universe of stars.
Talk about painting a picture with
Yeah.
words, right? Everyone is nodding like everybody's listening to you so raptly. You've written so many mysteries in the past.
Not so many, four.
Okay, so 100 books-ish, all the children's books, which we'll talk about in a second, and the Callista mysteries. What is it like to be back in mystery world?
It's harder for me because I've been away from it so long, and you have to plant red herrings and all of that, and it's a different process. When I do a children's novel, I can pretty much map the whole thing out before I start, and with this I couldn't. I kind of make I make the most elaborate outlines in the world, but not for this. I didn't. I have to kind of inch along. And so much of writing mysteries and thrillers is timing. And so that you have to kind of gauge the timing. It's like climbing a staircase, and you kind of want to get them up to a certain point, and you want people to think, oh, is this person going to fall off? And you have to, it's a lot with pacing in a mystery.
Well, you've done it so seamlessly in this book. There were times that I laughed out loud. There were times that I cheered. There were times that I was terrified. There were times that I was sad. And I'm delighted and shocked, but not surprised that the end of the plot and the emotional end. There are two real endings to this book.
Yeah.
The end of the plot and the emotional end are both just gorgeously done. So congratulations.
thank
Welcome back
Yeah.
to mystery. My final thing to tell you is I have never had so many brownie points with my grandchildren as when I told them that I knew you and that I could get their owl books signed. It was thank you for that. How did those owl books change your life and the movie?
Well, the owl books, I was saying about this. The owl books took 10 years of my life. I don't want to say 10 years off my life, but they were so popular and I was doing them for Scholastic, so I was having to keep up with the demand and all that, 2 books a year, which is a lot. And then the movie came, and that was on top of that. So this just feels so relaxed. I mean, it's great. And, if you're doing, there were 15 of those albums I was doing. Yeah, it was about 10 years of my life I was doing them.
Well, you made so many kids and so many grandparents and so many parents so grateful. So that was completely. How many of you have kids or grandkids that read the owl books? Of course. I mean, it's their classic, absolutely classic. And your new book that's out today as well.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, wait for it. It's actually very autobiographical. It's called Yesel's Journey. And my grandparents were born in Ukraine, and they came in, what year did they come, Chris?
1903.
1903. My father was the first born in this country. And unlike a lot of immigrants, Jewish immigrants from that era, they did not go to the Lower East Side. They took a boat that left them off in Halifax, and they went west. And they went as far as Duluth, Minnesota. That's where my father was born. He was the 4th or 5th of 6 kids. And he was raised there. Actually, his family belonged to the same synagogue as Bob Dylan's family. That's my claim to fame. And my aunt played canasta with Dylan's mother. So there's that. But I started kind of researching this stuff, and I found out a lot of Jewish immigrants from Russia, Ukraine, did go west, including Steven Spielberg's family. And somebody in the Spielberg family ran a trading post out on the Navajo reservation. So I just thought, oh, that'd make a good story, even though it's a little different from my family's story. But so I decided to write a book about it. But this book has taken forever to come out because I sold it right away. And then the guy it was Forrest Strauss actually, and he just never got on editing it. And then they passed it to somebody else who edited it, but they never got on getting an illustrator. So after 15 years, my agent and I thought, we got to get this book back and see that it comes out.
The time is right, though. The time is really perfect.
Yeah.
So that couldn't possibly be better. That's the things happen for a reason kind of thing. Congratulations, Kathy, on this book. It's really marvelous. It's engaging. It's fun. It's wise. It's smart. It's educational. It's inspirational. And we are so pleased to congratulate you tonight on this.
I'm so pleased to be interviewed by you. You're the best interviewer and the best writer. I mean, you're really tough.
Thank you. And we found out last week that not only did we go to the same ballet school in Indianapolis as kids, but that we were both
terrible
and kicked out of ballet school.
Well, they come up to your mother and they try to put it gently.
Well, Madame Diangera, can you imagine, with the stick and millions of bracelets, came up to my mom and said, "Your daughter is charming, but she will never be a ballerina. I cannot teach her." I'm like, I'm 8. How bad can it be? So we share that as well.
But I have to tell you something ironic about that. Many, many years later, we live in Cambridge, and we would rent our top floor to a Harvard student. And the Harvard student who rented our top floor, she was brilliant, was the daughter of Maria Tolstoy. Yeah, and she's a wonderful poet. Elise Passion, Paschen, and we're still friends. She's about 30 years younger than I am, but I mean, she's grown up.
Didn't you want to be Maria Tolstoy?
Oh yeah, and she came to our house when her daughter graduated from Harvard, and we had drinks with her. And she came with her sister, Margie Tolstoy, who's ballerina in Paris. And it was like a ballet going on in our living room with these 2 beautiful women just holding wine glasses. I was in awe.
You are so much fun to talk to. Does she not know a lot of cool stuff? She knows a lot of cool stuff. Congratulations, Kathy.
Thank you again.
Does anybody have any questions really quickly about this? Anything about Georgia O'Keeffe, or about the war, or Charles Lindbergh, or about the spy ring, or about New Mexico or Arizona or the Southwest? No. Okay. You're completely marvelous. Let me say this because I can and Kathryn can't, but these books are for sale. No pressure, it's just her career on the line. So if you love a good mystery, if you know someone who is an art fan, it's a good present, and we thank you. Congratulations.
Yeah, and unfortunately they've run out of the hardcover. They are going into a reprinting, and it just
so
came
sad.
out today. Yeah, but
That is a good paperback. Thank you all for coming.